We're going to be doing 30 minutes today, but we're happy to extend if you have questions. I'll just introduce people quickly first. My name's Justine Fox, and I have a colour consultancy called Studio Justine Fox, working on the basis of colour beyond aesthetics. We've got Ruth with us as well. Ruth's from Campbell Cadey Architects, who are architects, urban landscapers, and they design playful, inclusive places that enhance well-being. And then last but not least, I've got Patrick from Graphenstone Paints UK, who are hosting us today, which is amazing. And this is the most certified harm-free mineral eco paint in the world. So the reason we've come together, we're three companies who've done a project together, and it's looking at how you can work collaboratively to create an affordable and positive impact on community spaces. So today we're going to share some insights into our project Holdron's Green, which we're thrilled has been shortlisted for a Pineapple Award in the reuse activation category. And so we're going to focus on this holistic intervention to offer people a supportive space that's healthier and more respectful of our planet at the same time. So both of you, Ruth, let's start with you, because really the project kind of stems from Campbell Cadey, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Can you set a little bit of a background for us? Like, how did it all come about? Why this space?
So we've been working in the Bussy Building for about 10 years now, and the Bussy Building is a brilliant kind of reused space in Peckham. It's a large old warehouse that's been turned into a kind of artist's enclave in some ways. It's a creative environment. Lots of people rent studios there. And it's kind of it's a brilliant hub of lots of creative people. There's restaurants, there's bars, but there's also lots of things going on. And the space between the buildings is very industrial still. And the brilliant thing about the space is they don't charge a huge amount for spaces, and therefore they don't have huge amounts of money to invest in the public realm between the buildings. And so I've been talking to them for a while about how we could make it more engaging, more inviting, have somewhere that we could potentially as tenants go and sit and enjoy the local, you know, have our lunch outside, have somewhere to make a phone call, but also where local residents can also be able to use it, because there are lots of flats that overlook the site. There's lots of people who live in the local environment who don't have kind of really positive outdoor spaces of their own, and we wanted to be able to provide something that was a real positive benefit to the community. So after a lot of sort of talking about it for a few years and quietly mentioning it every time I saw anybody, we got approached by Jules, who works for the Peckham Festival and also for Copeland Park. And as part of the Peckham Festival last year, they wanted to create a legacy project, which was a sustainable garden space. They gave us over as part of Copeland Park outdoor space, which is what we now call Holdron's Green, and they wanted to be able to make it an environment that was as inclusive and sustainable as possible. Obviously my next question was how long, and they said it needs to be built in 3 months. And then they said, I asked how much money they had, and they said, oh, we don't have any. So we were then tasked with that joyous prospect of building and designing and creating a space that within a very short time frame that could really work for the community and be ready for launch in the September. So yes, so that's where we got to with that.
Quite a challenge. Yeah. For you.
It was fun though. You were there, you helped paint.
I did. I wrote the children.
You certainly did.
Well. I did. So Patrick, from your perspective at Graphenstone, do you find there's a particular reason for architects to approach Graphenstone on their projects? Obviously, we used it here in Holdron's Green, but what?
God, I'm a little bit nervous telling what architects think. We've actually got a live one here on the panel, but I'll do my best. I'm sure she'll tell me if I get this wrong. But I think that has evolved a lot, even in the 5 years that I've been involved with Graphenstone. So, you know, initially in the early years, I think paint was pretty much an afterthought. You know, architects are famously busy. They're always working at about 120% speed, aren't they? And so they would perhaps just in the old days have taken the old standard Dulux spec, copy and pasted it over, and good to go. And they really principally just thought about get the paint on the wall. So a bit of an afterthought. Colour, which is the main driver on the purchase of paints still, without any afterthought about the impact of that choice. So I think there's been a big pivot in the last few years. A lot of practices have signed up to you know, the climate emergency, and the focus has changed. And what you're seeing now is a greater interest in things like indoor air quality, ingredients, you know, VOCs. You know, there's this trade term called low VOC, which is a bit of a misnomer, really. It's convenient for the trade because it means ending up to 30 grams a litre. So you go and you buy your 5-litre pot of paints, and that's 150 grams of VOCs potentially. It's not low at all. It's kind of dangerous. So I don't know. There's a lot of greenwash around as well. So one of the ways that architects are looking much more closely these days to avoid that is at certifications. People like, or certifications like Cradle to Cradle and Eurofins and Global Green Tag. These give an independent stamp of approval on your products. So I think as well, you know, to more fully answer that, architects are also driven by their clients and what their clients want. It could be very budget driven, could be like in the example of Holdron's Green, no money. So that will mean, you know, potentially a much less eco-friendly range of products. So, you know, very often profit and margin will trump, you know, health and the planet. But there are these days way more large clients in particular that are focused on putting their best foot forward to present themselves as green and ecological. You know, big tech giants, for example, like Facebook, demanded for all of their interiors where we were involved, cradle to cradle certified products. This is a great step forward. And then finally, just as one other thought, and a big driver these days, of course, is carbon. And the built environment is responsible for some 50%, if you include the lifetime impact of the buildings that are designed and built, 50% of all carbon output. It's an enormous number. So any products that can help reduce that, and we have a range of paints that literally have a very, very low carbon footprint and then absorb carbon, again, in the curing process because of the lime content. These are very, very interesting, useful ways to further suppress
like
that embedded
it's such
carbon
a simple thing, but particularly when you're talking about scale, you know, that really kind of makes a significant impact on the carbon footprint of a build, doesn't it? So it is really interesting.
Yeah, just to add very quickly, we did a project for Greystar where we painted 1,000 student rooms for them during the course of last summer. The overall saving relative to a normal synthetic paint was 23 tons, just from paint. The Facebook project we did over 50 tons. So they're fringe in the great scheme of things compared to some of the savings you might get from, you know, steel and one thing or another. But nevertheless, they're easy wins with really useful.
It's almost like a subtle, really small shift and makes like a significant difference, doesn't it?
Yes.
Ruth, you and I met last year, probably about this time of year. I think it's because of Clerkenwell, which Clerkenwell's again next week. And I think when we met, you must have had in your mind already that you had this project you were talking about and that you wanted to work with a colour specialist, quite unusual for architects. What was really kind of behind the thinking with that for you guys?
So on this particular project, because we had no budget, we decided we'd use all the waste products that the Copeland Park had put together. They are complete hoarders. They had a huge warehouse of pallets and bits of timber and bits of metal that no one knew where they belonged or came from. And so we really had quite a kind of mishmash, eclectic kind of series of materials to work with. We also had this kind of interesting, quite small linear space, and we work a lot to do with mental well-being. And so I have a research degree looking at how we can create more what I call psychological comfort in the public realm. And for me, that kind of level of mishmash that we were dealing with was not going to, in that small space, create what would...
We lost your sound a second. You just dropped it a little. You're back.
Instagram told me I'd reached my limit for the day.
Have you?
Yeah.
So I've told it to ignore that for the day. So we, because of that, I really wanted to make the space feel quite cohesive and add a level of sort of nuance to it that I felt like it would really kind of, and warmth. And as architects, I think we feel like we're very good at that sort of thing, but we often kind of, and I'm just talking from me, not necessarily all architects, but to the sort of grey and white shades. And but I wanted something that felt vibrant and very much in keeping with the kind of community that we were trying to present for. And actually listening to your talk at Clerkenwell, I was really inspired by what you were saying. And then we met for a coffee afterwards. And immediately I felt like your work would really benefit the scheme. And it did.
Yeah, no, I mean,
said to me is that we need a neutral, and that neutral should be a pink. Literally blew my mind.
But honestly, Patrick, poor Ruth, she was like, this sort of grey, and then I was like, oh, we could try this pink.
And it's amazing. And now I think of pink as a neutral. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was a great project because you had quite a lot of restrictions in terms of the space for, you know, it's at the back of a gallery near the bins, isn't it? Isn't it? Not the most attractive, and surrounded by what I can only describe as institutional aluminium fencing. You do feel like you're having your, you know, stretch your legs
in the prison,
out of prison for half an hour. A little bit, so it was quite interesting, and also like looking at the colours around. Whenever people had used anything kind of impactful in colour terms, they'd stuck with blue. Like Ruth said, there's a residential, there's quite a bit of residential, and they use blue. They'd already used it as a mural on the walls, but actually once you start going down Peckham High Street, the whole vibe you get there is of warmth, and you know, I went down the red route because of this dead space aspect of it, and red is that kind of eye-catching colour, so to kind of sit within colour space. But it's quite interesting as well that actually you wanted it to be quite a flexible space as well as having that architectural cohesion to it. So you know, for me, I talk very much about colour beyond aesthetics all the time. You two know that. And in terms of using colour for sustainability, in terms of reflecting light, I feel is really important and something that we miss within the built environment. And white doesn't just do it. So that was kind of one of the drivers behind that kind of level of colour in the pink. And then, as well as human beings, you know, we need those like levels of activation and quietness, and so to be a like truly inclusive space, you need the colour to move people through it and support those different activities as well. So
just to say, Justine, quickly, you know, it was really interesting because the overall impact with the greenery of all the planters that you have there, all of this range of colours, it was so welcoming and joyous, if you know what I mean, as opposed to potential greys and off-whites. It's been cold and dull through a long winter that we've just had, which never seems to end, does it? You know, I think the impact was fantastic. It was a lovely, lovely palette of colours.
Like, so somebody came into the space and really, they kind of said, you know, I knew it would look different, but I didn't expect it to feel different, and it feels so welcoming and such a lovely place without it being, you know, colour on colour on colour. So it was, I kept in mind very much that idea of architectural cohesion and that upcycling of, like you say, just like waste materials. And and I mean, this is the reason why I brought Graphenstone to the project, you know, because for me, you're doing all of this really hard work on things like planting, and then to add a kind of toxic coating doesn't make sense. You want to be improving that quality of air, you know, in that little space. And a lot of the colour was around how the planting, because the planting is the hero of the place, it has to be. And it was around how those colours were changing. Ruth, have you got a bit more about the planting, because that was like quite interesting, the different levels that kind of initiated. Again, it's about initiating different activities and different moods, isn't it?
Exactly. I mean, we wanted to use a really sort of rich palette that was quite hard wearing and really vibrant, but at the same time didn't require huge amounts of maintenance. We're very conscious of the kind of lack of financing on the site, and therefore we didn't want to end up with a huge bill to kind of keep it looking gorgeous. And we worked with some brilliant people. So, you know, we worked with a couple of nurseries that I work with a lot, Provender and Evergreen, and they were really helpful in providing us with some plants. And what was lovely was actually being able to come up with a solution that meant, sorry, I've got terrible hay fever, my eyes are itching, and come up with solutions that allowed different levels of privacy. It would add interesting colour at all times of the year. And the interesting thing about this project is we were planting it for a September launch. September's not the time people expect gardens to be looking amazing, so we worked hard to make sure that it looked absolutely beautiful for September, but that now in spring it would also look amazing. We've got the meadows. We had a series of movable meadows that were based on pallets that could move around, that had this huge variety of colour and scents, and really sort of beautiful sensory planting. One of the meadows particularly that we love is called a low-grow meadow, and it's probably about 60% herbs. So it's full of chamomile and thyme and marjoram and all these amazing things. And what we wanted is those kind of beautiful colours to kind of, you know, work with the planting, so that the different experiences you had around the space felt like it all worked cohesively. So the meadows can be lain on, they can be put together to make a larger meadow. We had larger trees that helped draw you through the space. We had lots of grasses that were ranging in kind of from greens through to really deep purples that would blow in the wind. It's quite a windswept space. And also climbers that would help to sort of soften these really hard metal edges. So yeah, the planting works really was definitely the kind of hero of this.
I mean, those meadows, honestly, just you know, you're on quite an industrial site, and all of a sudden you can be, you know, getting your feet in the grass. You know, it's so grounding to be part of that. But obviously people are touching this stuff, and Patrick, you know, with eco paints, they've probably had a bit of a hard rap in the past, I would say, in terms of durability. People kind of like them, but you know, they're for somebody's interior where nobody touches the walls. But here, you know, it's at play in a fairly robust environment. Did you want to tell us a bit more about there's something special about it?
I mean, actually, well, a few things I like to think. I mean, Ruth mentioned the other day that the palettes and the planters and so on that we'd painted using Graphenstone paints end of last year. They'd been through this pretty poor, pretty rotten winter. You know, they'd properly been tested in the exterior space, and they're still looking great. So, you know, there's another endorsement of that. But I mean, if you step back a little bit and look at the kind of brief history of paints over the last 50, 60 years or so, it's all been about oil-based paints. And why is that? Well, they're cheap. The performance is pretty good. The problem is that they block in moisture, so that can lead to all sorts of issues over you know, the paint cracking and what they call FPS, sick building syndrome, and so on. Also, more importantly, they're very polluting, not just in manufacturing with huge carbon output at point of use with the VOCs as they are released into the room, but also as they die off with all the microplastics in the paints. And there was an amazing bit of research that came out early last year from Swiss group called Environmental Action. I think I mentioned this to you before, Justine, where they did a 144-page document, and they'd analysed how much of the world's oceans, microplastics, came from paint. They used to think it's 10%. The number they now quote is 58%, nearly 2 million tons of microplastics going into the oceans every year. Just an incredible number, year in, year out. So you know, the concept of a more sustainable paint using all those long trusted minerals like lime and chalk and clay and silicates and so on, but with the same performance as an acrylic, with no compromise on performance, would be a great new addition to the lineup. And I think that's where Graphenstone have come to the party. And the reason for that is the discovery of graphene. And this was something two Nobel Prize winning scientists from Manchester University fell upon, literally, with a block of graphite and some sticky tape. And they looked at it under the microscope. They could see this film on the sticky tape, looked at it under the microscope. And to cut a long 6-year story short, they announced the discovery of this first 2D, one atom thick material, 200 times stronger than tensile steel. So anyway, if you fuse graphene into these long trusted minerals that have been used for thousands of years, like lime, you suddenly end up with a class 1 strength, or class 1 being the wet rub test, equivalent to an acrylic, but without the same damage in terms of health and ecology. So yeah, it's a really amazing new development, and is giving us an opportunity to offer something more sustainable to the market.
That aspect that, you know, it's not. Sometimes I feel like when we talk about sustainability, it's always kind of like looking back, but actually here we're looking at technologies, new technologies. You know, graphene. I watched an amazing talk on transport design and the possibilities of graphene within the use of aviation, for example, would allow people to travel, reduce back all of the like harmful emissions. You know, there are phenomenal possibilities for it, and just something like this is, I think it's amazing.
Yeah. I think there have been about 16,000 patents taken out on graphene so far, mostly approved. Yeah, the Brits, they discovered it, they gave it away for free, a little bit like the internet, Berners-Lee, and you know, China and America, I think they've hoovered up a lot of the skills in production, but it's going to have an impact across all sorts of industries. We're talking about the age of graphene to replace the age of plastic.
Yeah, and something as simple as, like you say, your interiors. I do have another eco paint in one of my bathrooms, and it's the most beautiful colour, but it wipes off every time the colour transfers. And then I have a traditional paint in this very room that I'm in, and it has been pestered by moisture. Pestered, I swear. I'll have to find out from you, Patrick, how you get the old stuff off and go back to the new. Not easy.
Yeah, not easily.
We've got 5 more minutes left, so I thought I might pose like one a bit more bigger question in 5 minutes. So, you know, we've been talking about cities, and there's almost this kind of feeling that with climate emergency, we shouldn't be doing anything else. But obviously that's not feasible. We have needs for building, we have needs for housing, we have needs to maintain in terms of like retrofit as well. So we can't just sit back and do nothing. But so we need to talk about sustainable development, really. And the way that it's described is that, you know, one doesn't really work without the other. So to be a truly sustainable development, we need to look at, yes, environmental, it's really important, but also like social impact of it and the economic impact of it as well. The Mayor of London has set his target for 0 carbon emissions by 2030. So that's, I believe, 20 years earlier than central government. So that's quite an ambitious target. So just briefly, how do you feel that as an industry we can support this kind of environmental mission in balance with some of those social and economic needs? Who's brave enough to hit it first?
No, well, I think that it's such a pertinent question, and I think what we do as a practice, a lot of it is about both those kind of levels of sustainability. For me, sustainability is about true inclusivity. It's about making something that lasts. It's about making something where we can, the way you reuse. It's about using materials that are positive and local. And it's about making it so that there is a space, I mean, in terms of city spaces, that they are inclusive for all different members of the community. Because actually, if everybody's using them, then they become more sustainable anyway. As long as they're vibrant and engage people to activate them, then actually people being outside, being engaged with their natural environment, promoting mental well-being, all of those things kind of, for me, become such a crucial part of it. And actually when we can do these projects where you're engaging the community in that, it makes it even more so. So I know that not every project we're going to work on is going to have of community engagement in the way that some of my projects do, but when you do, you feel a level of sustainability that is just above and beyond, and that's because people have ownership and they have a desire to make that space as good as possible, and they're creative. We need to tap into all sorts of levels of creativity about how we can make spaces more sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I read a statistic that apparently there's about 60% of employees currently experiencing some level of anxiety.
Yeah.
Only like 50% of those seek medical attention. And I was really interested in that. At the same time, there was like an 11-year study, big study between several universities that looked at adults, about 500,000, I think. It's like massive. So over 11 years, and they found like actually there was a correlation between depression and poor mental health and air quality, poor air quality. So all of this is incredibly important. It kind of, I guess, leads to Graphenstone, Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting topic, this one, isn't it? Yeah, I think in America, in the West Coast, for example, where a lot of trends start and then they come over here a few years later, people are starting to choose where they work based on the healthiness of the space in which they're asked to work in. Because it can have a really big impact. You know, the air that you breathe long term, it weighs something like 5 times the food you eat every day, the amount of oxygen that you, and air that you absorb in your body. So imagine that over the course of a lifetime, we breathe around 11,000 times a day, I gather. But so of course, Ruth is involved in specifying a very wide range of products. I'm only involved in paint, so apologies for being a bit myopic about paint today. But and I want to talk about lime very briefly. I mean, been used for thousands of years, since the Roman times, and the king of paint ingredients. So in terms of this desire to get back to a healthier system using clean materials, well, lime in paints is the wonder material because it absorbs CO2 in curing. It has a relatively low output. There's no microbeads or plastics in lime. It's very high reflective value. So on the outside of buildings, it's pushing away the impact of sunlight. You add a bit of anatase titanium dioxide to it, you turn it into a proactive air purification system that actively removes toxins. So there really are options around now that can be used, which are economically viable. It's about the same price as a high-end acrylic, roughly speaking, to meet the needs of the goals, needs and goals.
Yeah, no, and that is really interesting because you mentioned like the light reflectancy, and I think I touched on it a little bit when I was talking about the green itself. But that is kind of a significant place where colour can help in designing places. So those colour strategies. because I think people, they go, oh, well, let's go for the most reflectant, and you know, let's go like the Mediterranean, that, you know, around there everybody paints their houses white, but there is precedent there, and that's something that's been ongoing for a while. And they've done testing in there was a research done in Karlsruhe, and actually they found that if they overcooled the cities, so if you just use white, then actually you're going to start pushing pollutants back down. You start altering the microclimates. They've looked at it in Arizona as well. And so there is this this question where actually we need to look at potentially reinstating what was the original biodiversity in terms of light reflectancy. I'm not saying we have to paint all our buildings green, but there's a little blog post that I put on with Graphenstone a couple of days ago, and that is absolutely the point of that, is designing with light reflectancy values, and you can get very similar ones in different colors, so you can still create spaces that people very much feel better in, safer. You can shape the city, mediate urban density, so there's actually there is a lot, and particularly this collaboration, this kind of cross-industry collaboration, and this dialogue, I think, is just like, well, you know one thing, I know another, and we start to navigate together, and then, you know, something very interesting. So we're past our 1:30 now, so I don't know if anybody had any questions. I haven't seen anything scroll through. Have you, Patrick? No, I don't. I'm going to open up my WhatsApp to see if the guys have sent anything through, because we're very happy to answer anything if anybody has anything.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, they can always reach out to us later.
If you do have any messages or any questions or anything like that that you want to ask at a later point, what we'll do is we'll post this on our socials, and you have our tags, you can reach out to us, and yeah, thank you so much, guys. It was lovely
lovely to you. Excellent, great.
Thanks.
Brilliant, Justine. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Great to see you.